Welcome to our webinar. We are pleased today to be able to offer this special event on multicultural education for gifted students. Our presenter, Donna Ford, is currently a distinguished professor at The Ohio State University and SIG's current Person of Significance. Dr. Ford was selected for the SIG Award for her work as a transformational advocate for multicultural gifted education. Dr. Ford is one of the leading experts on gifted Black students. She's the author, co-author of Recruiting and Retaining Culturally Different Students in Gifted Education, Reversing Underachievement Among Gifted Black Students, and Multicultural Gifted Education. Professor Ford has written over 150 articles and book chapters, and she has made over 1,000 presentations at professional conferences and organizations and in school districts. Without taking any more of her precious webinar time, I'm going to turn the program over to her now.
I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar. I'm very honored that you chose to take this hour with us. So without further ado, because I always over-prepare, I'd like to go ahead and get started. I am going to be talking about the Bloom Banks Matrix, which I originally created in the late 1990s, but has since been updated with some support from Dr. Michelle Fraser Trotman Scott. To lay the context, I'm always focusing on what it means to be a culturally responsive educational system. And I want to contend that there are several components. The first component begins with considering who our students are. So who are we teaching? What is the child's or the children's cultural backgrounds, their language, their cultural characteristics, their interests, their learning styles, and more. And when we are cognizant of that, when we are aware of that, when we're even interested ourselves, then it will help us in terms of philosophy, creating a welcoming, nurturing, culturally responsive learning environment. It will help to improve curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So for this webinar, we're not focusing on 4 of those. We're mainly focusing on curriculum, culturally responsive curriculum. So the work that I do, I conduct through 2 lenses. One is looking at our children's needs and development, and you see 5 listed there. For example, academic, psychological, social, cultural, affective. So I look at that through an initial lens of what do we know about students who are gifted, and then what do we know about students who come from culturally different backgrounds? And my goal is to merge those. And I did that similarly with this Bloom Banks Matrix. So Bloom, so to speak, represents gifted education, and Banks represents multicultural education. So when we are talking about, say, culturally responsive gifted education, which I use interchangeably with multicultural gifted education, at least when it comes initially to instruction. Now, again, I'm not focusing on instruction, I'm focusing on curriculum, but I just want to share this visual with you. In one discipline, gifted education, we often talk about compacting, acceleration, tiered assignments, critical thinking, etc., and more. This list, I mean, those are not comprehensive. When I am working in the field of gifted education, and I do mean working in 2 different fields, unfortunately, then I am, and we tend to be talking about social and cooperative learning, talking about real world experiences, tactile and kinesthetic experiences, as well as creativity through a different lens than we usually talk about in gifted education. So one of my favorite models of differentiation is by Carol Ann Tomlinson at the University of Virginia. I don't have time to go over this entire visual, but what I want to stress is that when we talk about differentiation, first, again, as with that first slide, he talks about learners' needs and have been guided by what you see here. But if you look, and I don't know if my little pointer will show up, but if you look under product, you will see where it says, I'm sorry, on the third, I'm sorry, in the middle, you will see what says readiness, interest, and then it says learning profile. So with learning profile, I want to emphasize again, we're talking about students who are culturally different, and therefore their culture cannot be ignored. We cannot have a culture blind perspective. I also want to say that this model is based on, I'm sorry, Bloom's taxonomy, and this is one of my favorite sites to go to for the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Now, again, I want to emphasize, I usually have more slides in here than I will use, so please accept my apologies for skipping over as I look at time. So I don't want to insult anyone with going over, especially since I believe I'm talking mainly to those who are in the field of gifted education. I don't want to insult anyone by going over Bloom's taxonomy, but I do want to say that I like the Bloom's wheels that you can find in multiple places, mainly because of what may appear to be obvious, but the general verbs that go along with each level, and then some recommended projects and activities, tasks that go with each level. So I always just say, get a Bloom's wheel to help you. And this is just an example of how there are multiple ones. So skipping over Bloom, I want to go ahead and talk more about multicultural education and then merge these two models. So one of the things before I do that is to say, one of the ways to ensure that our students are critical thinkers is for them to have a robust and extensive vocabulary. Too often, so I'm not stereotyping, I'm saying too often or in general, it is an unfortunate reality that children who live in poverty tend not to have a large vocabulary, and that's all children who live in poverty, not just children of color. And so we as educators have to do a much better job of promoting an extensive vocabulary among our students. And so I like the idea of having, for example, vocabulary walls, and this would just be a small example, but it should go with every discipline. Now I want to say this, and this is just my reality. When I am working with teachers, when I'm collaborating with teachers and listening to how they are talking with Black children and Hispanic children of all income levels, it tends to be, I'm sorry, very low level. I don't see a lot of rigor taking place. And the activities, the assignments tend to be at the lowest level, those lowest 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So for me, it looks something like this. And I call this, instead of rigor, what I'm seeing in too many of our classrooms is what I call rigor mortis, heavy emphasis on low level thinking. And the highest we may get to is analyzing. So as we transition, or I transition a little bit more into multicultural education, I have to say something about children's literature. And so I have I have this slide here, and there are updates as well. But this, I want to emphasize that too often it is going to be very difficult for you to implement rigorous multicultural curriculum unless you have authentic and extensive amounts of multicultural literature. So I encourage you to follow Lee and Lowe, their online book company, where you can study almost annually the lack of diversity among our children's literature. And this is at all age levels. So this is another graph saying basically the same thing, another visual. Little has changed. Little is changing. I also want to emphasize that according to the Cooperative Children's Book Center, that there's also very little focus on low-income children in children's literature. Now, I just want to share this as a proud grandmother. I bought my son the book Crown not too long ago. He really enjoyed it. And then maybe 3 weeks later, he went to get a haircut. And he was very excited and sent me this picture and said, Gran, that's what he calls me. He says, I look like the boy in this book. And so this shows, as Rudine Sims Bishop, an emeritus professor here at Ohio State University, what she said about our children need books, mirror books, to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. All right, so I want to, I'm sorry, skipping over some slides again. So I want to talk about philosophy, my philosophy, and I hope you share this with me. And that is that culturally different students are culturally different 24 hours of the day, 7 days of the week. And so therefore we must make sure that we are being responsive to our students in culturally relevant ways, not culturally assaultive ways. I want to emphasize that every school subject can and must be infused with multicultural content, not just some school subjects, but every school subject. Not just language arts, not just music, not just art, but math, science, every school subject. I love this quote that says, multicultural education is as essential to teaching as nurturing is to human development. To me, that's a very powerful quote. It talks about the importance of why we're hosting and having this webinar. Continue with philosophy. I want to stress that multicultural education is for all students, not just students of color, and multicultural education should take place 24 hours of the day in every subject area. I also want to stress, and this may be repeated later, that even when it comes to Black History Month, that should be every month, not just in February. The less we know about others, the more we make up. I want to go back to the original slide in order to emphasize that we must get to know our students in order to be able to effectively, proactively, aggressively, without apology, infuse multicultural content into the curriculum. So when I think about multicultural education, I want to offer that it promotes engagement, it promotes equity, empowerment. It is against ethnocentrism. I really believe, as you saw with the picture of my grandson, that it can promote ethnic/racial pride and awareness. And when done well, it also promotes equity. And that's the short list. So I'm going to not go over this slide because this is being videotaped, I'm sorry. But I really appreciate this work on guidelines for a culturally responsive curriculum by Smith, 1999, perhaps updated, but I've yet to find that. So I am obviously arguing that curriculum is not differentiated when it is color blind. And so we're going to talk about how not to make that happen. So here's where I want to give some examples of what not to do. I know we're not having discussion, but I hope you will with your colleagues at some point. But here are some examples that create a sense of urgency for me for the reason for having this webinar. So this was a student who I knew, teacher who I knew, who said he used this example here in the US and then went to Saudi Arabia and then got in trouble for asking this question in a health class. And as you can see, it says, what can be done to make sure you live a longer life? In Saudi Arabia, that was culturally assaultive. This is certainly relevant today. And this is where a third grade teacher was asking students to color a picture of the Statue of Liberty and then have her read the inscription. And one of the Mexican students in her class, whose parents were undocumented, was troubled by the inscription and wanted to know why so many Americans hated his family and wanted them to go back home. Now, I'm not trying to be political, but this is an issue of this building a wall and the border. And this teacher was unprepared for this, but had she known her students and was was willing to infuse, current events into the classroom, she would have addressed this well, but she did not. I want you to take a look at this activity where students are supposed to be doing a simple assignment talking about feelings. And look at the one that says sad and look at the one that says angry. So these messages to our students, all of our students, are not just blatant, they're also subliminal. They're not just explicit, they're also implicit. So a teacher who is culturally responsive would have been aware of these activities thus far and addressed them or not even done them. This is from 2019. Student had teachers do an activity and it says slavery was a choice. We cannot unpack this, but I just take a look at it. How can anyone do that in 1999? In 2019, no less 1999. This is also from 2019, where a teacher was, from my understanding, having students make necklaces. And there's nothing funny about that. A teacher in 2019, where I used to be near Nashville, said teacher resigns after giving an assignment asking students to pretend that their parents owned slaves. Culturally assaultive. 5th grade class holds mock slave auction selling Black students. Authorities are investigating. May 2019. So I'm looking at time. I'm just not going to belabor this, but there's one word to describe this. These are racist, whether intentional or not. They're problematic, and students are traumatized by these activities. It also empowers white students. This is not what any of us should be aspiring to do. Anyway, as you can see, I can go on and on and on. You can read these at your leisure. I want to go ahead and jump into curriculum. Now, I don't know if this will show up. I did not get a chance, and I'll take the blame for this, for not testing this, but I want you to see this short video if it shows up. If not, then I will explain it and we can proceed.
Slaves built the pyramids. Slaves built the Parthenon. Slaves built America. Slaves, this is your song. Thank you. Slaves. Thank you. Slaves. Thank you. Slaves. Slaves, this is your song. Thank you.
So my fear with this video is that a teacher, and I'm sure it's happened, but that a teacher will think this is an appropriate video to show, not knowing the negative ramifications for showing this and thinking that it is rigorous and high quality. This was also not too long ago, a school assignment. So I'm skipping over these now. I'm gonna share one more video.
Parents are outraged tonight over third grade math homework. It referenced slaves picking fruit and violence. Channel 2's Carrie Kavanaugh's live in Gwinnett County with why one father says the assignment forced him to have a difficult conversation with his son. Carrie.
Monica, those parents contacted us after they read this controversial assignment. They say they were shocked to see math problems talking about slavery and beatings. They tell me they want to know exactly what the teachers here at Beaver Ridge Elementary School were thinking when they wrote them.
I had to explain to him why Daddy was upset because of the words that were used in that problem.
The problem appeared on a third grader's math assignment. Terrence Barnett was outraged when he read his son's homework. One problem said, each tree had 56 oranges. If 8 slaves picked them equally, then how much would each slave pick? Then there was another. If Frederick got 2 beatings per day, how many beatings did he get in 1 week?
I'm having to explain to my 8-year-old why slavery or slave or beatings isn't a math problem. So, and that hurts.
Dad Christopher Braxton had the same reaction.
It kind of blew me away. Frederick, if anyone got any beatings, you don't put that into the homework of any source.
Both fathers contacted the principal at Beaver Ridge Elementary School in Norcross. Then they called us. They wanted to know how these questions ended up on a child's homework. I brought that question to Gwinnett School District officials.
In this one, the teachers were trying to do a cross-curricular activity.
Spokesperson Sloan Roach says the third grade teachers were attempting to cross curriculums, adding some social studies lessons into math problems. But the problem with these questions, there's no historical context.
We understand that there are concerns about these questions, and we agree that these questions were not appropriate.
Whoever put together this paperwork and everything else, the schools and everything, shouldn't teach it this way.
The parents tell me that the principal here is collecting the assignments to shred them so they wouldn't be distributed any longer. Moving forward, they say they're going to work with the teachers to develop more appropriate questions, and they'll say they'll do a better job of reviewing them before they go home with students. We're live tonight in Gwinnett County. Carrie Kavanaugh, Channel 2 Action News.
So if you were to get on the internet and look up this in terms of part 2, well, first of all, you saw this video, but in terms of part 2, you would see that 2 weeks later, a teacher in the same district, third grade, allowed her students to do a slave game where she ran around, where the students ran around, caught Black students, and auctioned on them, culturally assaultive. So if you're wondering, like, why are we going through like these 15, 20 slides, however many there are, of course I have more, of these culturally assaultive assignments, it is because it is just that. And these are recent assignments, not too far in the past, and therefore we still see these egregious, traumatic assignments taking place. So they're just examples of many examples of what not to do. And I'm just like showing you, there are just so many more. So author episodes, etc. So let's go to the goals of multicultural education. Going back to James Banks, who is at the University of Seattle, considered the father of multicultural curriculum. I mean, literally curriculum, which is what we're going into for this next half an hour. It's about desegregating the curriculum, educational equity, having an equal opportunity to learn. Some of the ones that were already mentioned before, but they're worth repeating. Multicultural education has many goals and benefits. And again, not only for students of color, but for all students. If you look at the second point to the last, we believe that it does improve social harmony and decrease racial discord among students from different backgrounds. So content integration, equity pedagogy, knowledge construction, reducing prejudice, as well as empowering students. This is a visual that I created just in terms of strategies. I'm not going to list them. You see them on the screen. I'm not going to list all of them. You see them on the screen. But some of the important points that are worth noting is that when there are strategies out there that promote high levels of multicultural education, and that includes having multiple perspectives, honing in on real world and relevant issues relevant to students, having discussions about social justice, having a diverse faculty and staff, administrators, involving in significant ways the community, multicultural materials. The important issues and themes include equity, peace and harmony, cooperation, resilience, forgiveness. African Americans are very forgiving culturally, sometimes to a fault, in my opinion, and racial pride, racial and ethnic pride. So let's go ahead and talk about James Banks's levels. Sorry that S is not positioned correctly. But the 4 levels, multicultural curriculum, is 4 levels are contributions, additive, transformation, social action. We are going to, you're going to hear, about all 4. Here is a visual that captures this as well. So at the bottom, in terms of Banks' models of the 4 levels of how to infuse multicultural content in the curriculum, I've intentionally color-coded this red because I want to say that this is dangerous and we must not stop here. Very, very problematic level. And unfortunately, and I do mean unfortunately, it is the most common level or most common approach, and it is called the contributions level. So again, I want to emphasize now we're into beyond going from what the problems are and the rationale for needing this to here's how to do it. Okay, so contributions level, I want to give you 4 words to remember so that you can obviously recall what this level is. And that is, the 4 words are food, fun, fashion, and folklore. We call them the 4 F's, food, fun, fashion, folklore. When you see that your curriculum, that your materials, your activities, your videos, your discussions are focusing on the 4 F's only or primarily, then it is problematic. And it is not, it is at, the lowest level. Let me repeat myself. It is at the lowest level of multicultural content infusion. Problem is that students acquire a superficial understanding of racially, ethnically, culturally, linguistically different groups. Another problem is that biases and stereotypes can be, 1, learned. We can teach at this level biases and stereotypes, or 2, they can be reinforced. Both of those are problematic. So contributions is, unfortunately, the most common approach. That is what teachers know, because too often we have not been given multicultural training, and we graduate without even knowing James Banks's model. Food, fun, fashion, folklore. And I hope in your mind, you are thinking about your curriculum right now, your activities right now, what you plan for February, Black History Month, or September, Hispanic Heritage Month, or any other month or event focusing on students of color, and that you will recognize that at these levels, if you're at these levels, is problematic. I can still recall my experiences throughout the K-12, my K-12 experiences, where we would be asked to bring in food, and teachers would expect Black students to bring in, and I'm very serious, like fried chicken. They would expect Hispanic students to bring in tacos. This still happens, and we want to avoid this from this point on. Pay attention to those problems. Next, and still problematic, is cautionary, is what we call the additive approach or level. And the words that I want you to think about to remember this are safe, appendage, and temporary. Oh, one other word, I'm sorry. One word I also want to say is one-sided, one perspective. All right, those will be the 4 words. So this is where we tentatively, safely, temporarily start adding multicultural content, concepts, and themes, point of views to the curriculum. However, the structure of the curriculum does not change. It remains intact. So teachers will do an activity, read a book, and then check it off their to-do list and keep moving forward. Unfortunately, at this level, the mainstream perspective predominates and is deemed the norm, the standard, what is correct. And that goes back to that one-sided perspective, which does not promote critical thinking clearly. I also want to stress that when we use the word safe, this is where, and today is appropriate. Yesterday was Martin Luther King Day. So this example is appropriate, and I hope it resonates with you. This is where we have, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the curriculum, a federal holiday named after him. We have streets named after him, usually in the inner city and usually in the most crime-ridden areas. I need to say that. That's another webinar. But anyway, we have Martin Luther King, but what about Malcolm X? Where is he in your curriculum? Where is his holiday? Where are the streets named after him, etc.? Their styles, in many ways, were oppositional. Martin Luther King was more appealing to the white masses, whereas Malcolm X was considered more radical, and therefore he is less likely to appear in our curriculum. So there's the censoring of those who speak up, like I do, and have strong voices and are unapologetic about talking about social, economic, racial, and ethnic, also linguistic injustices. So the problem is students fail to understand how the predominant culture interacts with and is related to or codependent upon racially and culturally different groups. So that which is politically safe, that which is politically correct, that which is, or those who are considered less controversial are more likely to be taught and discussed in the curriculum. Safe, appendage, temporary, and one-sided. I also want to say, and then I'll move to the next one, at this level, I have seen where, and I'm going to use the notion of isms, ISMS, where teachers will focus on one ism, such as sexism, when they're doing an assignment, and then ignore racism that also exists in the assignment. And so that goes back to the safe piece and more. So I want to stress that an issue I hope that is making sense. But an issue is that we must address all isms in the curriculum. And if or when a teacher can address, say, classism, which must happen, or sexism, which must happen, but then ignore racism, I consider that very problematic, polemic, one-sided, and a distortion of what is really taking place in society and schools. Now, moving to transformation, this is absolutely where we need to be and continue to keep moving. So this is why it's color-coded in blue. So transformation, I consider it through the eyes of. And so several words I want you to remember would be multiple points of view, opposing points of view, empathy, which is through the eyes of, and then in all subject areas. So specifically, this is where the curriculum is now transformed. It has changed to enable all students to view concepts, issues, themes, events from different perspectives through the eyes of. So I remember seeing not too long ago where Ellen Ochoa, the first Hispanic female astronaut, where she shares about her experiences, not just with sexism, but also with racism. And so with an activity like that, and there is one on my website based on her, it will be like, how do you think Ellen Ochoa felt, ... And then how would you feel had you been her? This promotes empathy. This helps you see multiple points of view. This helps students get out of their shell and look at other realities that they may not be experiencing. So this is about self-reflection, critical pedagogy, and a pedagogy of discomfort, meaning dissonance. So I don't see problems with transformation. I see promises because of the curriculum being transformed, overhauled, not just reformed, but revolutionized with empathy. And with all this trauma going on and students just bullying and fighting each other, we definitely need empathy, not pity, but empathy. And then critical thinking is promoted. Next, or so to speak, last, we get to social action. And this is where students don't just think about issues and topics, perspectives, and so on. This is where they do something about it. So social action, social justice, change in some way, in some capacity, at some level is the goal. Equity is the goal. Students focus on important social issues, and I want to say contemporary in particular, and take actions if they can to resolve them. And if they cannot take action, then we help them to suggest what they would do if they could do it. Or we help them to give recommendations to others who we hope have the power, have the capacity to make changes. So students, therefore, are empowered to resolve social issues and problems, especially around those centered around injustices. So reading and talking, looking at videos about poverty, about racial injustices, not just in other settings, but even in our own setting. Those, I don't remember how many there were, but those what not to do pieces, those culturally assaultive assignments, most from 2019 that I shared with you, when students were exposed to those assignments, it was not just tear them up and let's not do this again. This was about reteaching students to undo and unpack the problems that saturated each of those assignments, each of those, whether they're subtle or whether they were blatant. It doesn't matter to me. They're both problematic. They're both problematic. So students would suggest or make recommendations when they can't. I want to emphasize that this model is not age bound. We can do transformation and social action at all age and grade levels. So yes, with our preschoolers, yes, with our kindergartners, yes, meaning early childhood education and above. And for those of you who are looking at this through the lens of being a caregiver, then I hope you're doing the same at home, not age specific, not grade specific. So there is, for example, a children's book is where teaching students ABCs, and I use this example a lot, but it says E is for Eskimos. And there's a picture of an, so to speak, I'm gonna go ahead and use the word Eskimo, which needs to be corrected. That's social action, that's transformation. And he is fishing. So, and then there's an igloo behind him. Well, students need to be updated on the correct term. They need to have conversations about other occupations among, for example, Inuits and other habitats as well. And a teacher could listen to students' concerns about that one page in an alphabet book and send it to the publisher and the author requesting that they update this information. That's transformation, that's social action. So our little babies, our young ones, can know that they can make a difference too. That's just one example. So I'm going to put this diagram up here. Oh, I'm not sorry. All right, so that you can see those words again. Additive is missing the one that says one per perspective. So social action, empowerment, equity, justice would be what we're talking about in terms of multicultural, in terms of social action. So I did not look at, I think I did that in about 10 minutes trying to explain Banks. He is most deserving, his model is most deserving of an entire webinar alone, but that's not what we planned for. So earlier, Bloom was mentioned. Again, what not to do was addressed. I've just introduced briefly Banks, and so I'd like to go to the Bloom Banks model. Yes, I'm intentionally leaving that there. We're not going over it. Okay, so I want to stress a couple of things. One, the matrix that I'm about to introduce or reintroduce for those of you who are familiar with it can be used with, clearly, to state the obvious, multicultural material. I also want to emphasize that keep in mind the paucity, the dearth of multicultural literature, especially high quality. But I want to emphasize that the matrix can be used with non-multicultural material. And so, no excuses. You can use material that you already have, lesson plans you've already implemented, those you plan to implement, and they may not have been intended for multicultural reasons, but you should, can, must do that. So here is the matrix, and this is where is the color-coded one. I neglected to say, rushing to get to this webinar, my apologies. I neglected to say, so I want to go ahead and say it now, that you can find these matrices on my website, as well as samples of completed matrices. So you can get the overview, what I'm doing now, but you can get samples of completed matrices by myself and by actual classroom teachers. So this is color coded. So it is a 4x6 matrix composed of 4 quadrants. The first quadrant, coded red, is the day. Oh, I'm sorry, this came in here too quickly. Well, it's not going to let me separate for some reason, but it came, is the red quadrant. So in this quadrant, it is low on both models. Low because it's at contributions and additive, and low because it's knowing through applying. So of all 24 cells, the lowest one is knowing, which I'm used to saying knowledge, but knowing and contributions. So explanation is that teachers, you know what, all right, this slide is not supposed to be in here, so I hope it can be edited out. But anyway, this is more for what teachers are doing in case we evaluate them, but it's the same slide. I'm sorry, same concept. So my apologies. I hope this can be edited out. All right, so let's go with this one here. So this is where we're gonna go with quadrant 1, and I just made it larger. So this is where students are taught, and they know facts about cultural artifacts, events, groups, and other cultural elements. So low on both. And then very low still, but the highest one in this quadrant is applying and additive. And this is where students are required to and can apply information that they learn about cultural concepts and themes. Now, I want you to keep in mind about cultural concepts and themes. We're in the lower part of this quadrant, but concepts and themes from one perspective, in a safe way, in a temporary way, and in a disconnected way. Keep that in mind because that emphasizes the concerns about additive that were expressed earlier. In the next one, quadrant 2, this is where we are low, look at the top, on Bloom, but then we're high on Banks, meaning transformation and social action. So I'll go with comprehension and comprehending and transformation. So students are taught to understand, and they can demonstrate their understanding of important cultural concepts, themes, etc., from different perspectives. All right, from the perspective of someone else, through the eyes of someone else. We're trying to put them in the place of someone else. So understanding and then transformation. Keep in mind those words I gave earlier. I wanted to be clear, if it's not yet clear, that the difference, the key difference, or one of the key differences between additive and transformation is when we add the pieces about multiple perspectives and empathy and integral through the curriculum. So that's quadrant 2. 3 is where I feel like I'm at a gifted education conference. There's critical thinking, so to speak, analysis, or now analyzing, evaluating, and creating highest levels of Bloom's taxonomy, but in a colorblind way. And sometimes perhaps many times, in a culturally assaultive way, because we're at contributions, food, fun, fashion, folklore. So we're analyzing basically garbage. That's the only word that comes to mind. It's been a long day. We're analyzing nothing. We're promoting stereotypes and biases or reinforcing them. And then with creating, let's say, additive, students are asked to and can synthesize important information about cultural concepts and themes from one perspective in a safe way. The last quadrant is looking at the journey, and the journey, the destiny. You can't go wrong in this quadrant. You cannot go wrong in this quadrant. And so here, let's just go with the highest level. We are at creating, and we are at social action. So students are creating or suggesting or recommending a plan of action to address social or cultural issue. They are empowered, they want change, and this is where we want them to be. I really want to stress that I am pleased also that Bloom's taxonomy has changed and made creating the highest level. At both of these, creating is doing, social action is doing. Now, my apologies, I'm seeing that a slide was out of place, and this is the one that was out of place, so that you can see the entire matrix color-coded, but it was expanded earlier, and so you had a stronger, a better visual. So with this here, I want to give an example of, I'm going to say this could be analyzing. It could also be evaluating. Well, I'm going to use a different example. So I remember working with a white female one year, and she wanted to do her senior, she was a high school student, her senior thesis on why there were so few Black students in her advanced placement class. I really appreciate the empathy, the observation, the concern. She decided that she would do her senior thesis on this topic. So she got approval under my guidance or tutelage to interview Black students who were in AP and some who weren't in AP, and learned, so we're going to put that under evaluating, it was a study, and learned that the reason they did not want to be in AP was because AP was in a quadrant in the building set apart from all the other classrooms, and they felt that they were always being teased going to AP classes or watched by others. There was jealousy. They felt isolated from the other students. So it was very impressive. And not only this was not her intent, but once it was done, it was completed, it was so well done that she said, I really got a lot out of this assignment. I learned a lot about myself. And I would like to take it to the principal and see if he will change where AP classes are being held. Well, as you can see, again, we're still in evaluating with Bloom, but the social action piece came into place when she asked to share that with someone who was in a position to make changes. The principal was very impressed and actually shared it with the superintendent. And so it was my understanding that the district took an entire look at their AP classes based on this young lady's senior, this high school student's senior project. So that would be an example of evaluating and social action. Some may say it's creating as well because she did develop her own survey and interview. So there can be overlap. I have yet to, hold on, we're almost done. I've yet to do this, so you're the first, and it's been since 2015, so you're the first to see this, but I have plans to create at some point the Bloom Banks Wheel, the Ford Bloom Banks Wheel, where we would, as a group, have a game and just spin, for example, that yellowish piece, and then we would test, so to speak, teachers, or I would, on their understanding of the matrix. I need to end by saying that the matrix, there's nothing else like this, if I must say so myself. The matrix is not something else to just do. It is a way to transform, to use one of the levels, your curriculum. And even if you don't have full permission to do that, but you can at least tinker, and I mean that in a good way, your curriculum, so that you are getting at the higher levels of Bloom's text. The higher levels of the two. So take a blank matrix, then take a previous lesson plan, and based on what you've done, fill in the cells. Then that's one way. And then now, based on what you know about banks, you can even do more with filling in the empty cells and the quadrants. And by the way, you can, like number 3 says, you can have more than one item in a cell. You can also create an original matrix using brainstorming. Let your ideas flow. Don't be linear. The point is you must get into quadrant 4. This benefits all students. So therefore, with Bloom's, you have rigor. And with banks, you have relevance. And this is for all students. Looking at the time, I want to stress and end, and this is on my website, by sharing just a hodgepodge matrix. The items have really nothing to do with each other for the most part, hence hodgepodge. But I'm sharing that so that you can at least have it. And if we were in a workshop, or if we had a longer time, then without showing you this matrix, I would ask you questions for you to let me know where you think which cell, you think they should be placed in. Not just which quadrant, but which cell you think they should be placed in. Last, and I'll turn it over, I am aware that some of these slides toward the end continue to have the original Bloom's, the original Bloom's taxonomy, with evaluation being the highest level. I apologize, I'm so busy, I just have not had a chance to make these changes. And then I think about the changes when I'm actually doing the presentation or a webinar. So please know that I am aware of that. Switch those 2 columns and we are good to go. Thank you for attending this webinar. I apologize for having more slides than I was able to go through. That's always going to be something that happens. I always apologize. But I hope that what we did go over, you find to be useful in order to not be culturally assaultive to any of your students. Thank you. Have we lost our host?
No, I'm here. Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much for this powerful presentation and just wonderful information that we'll have time to think about and use in our curriculum. And I want to thank all the participants for taking time to join us as we are reminded about the critical need to develop multicultural content in gifted and talented education. We appreciate these valuable words from Dr. Ford and hope that you will help demonstrate our appreciation to her as we honor her work with a scholarship fund in her name. So please consider a donation of $30 or more or anything to our scholarship fund, all of which goes directly to help needy, gifted, talented, and creative students. I've put the link up there where you can make your donation, and please just select Summer Institute for the Gifted under donation type. So thank you once again, and we hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.